So, as I said in my Q&A videos, I saw this social justice horseshit coming ages ago. And I say that because I've been going through some of my oldest writings, looking for old projects to possibly revive. And among them, dated 2004, was a piece simply entitled, "Has Political Correctness Gone Too Far?" A piece that I had long ago forgotten about. That was over 13 years ago now, and to put that into perspective, that's at least 2 years before both The Amazing Atheist and Thunderfoot started their channels, at least 4 years before Lacey Green started her channel, and probably right around the time she just started sprouting the cleavage she would eventually use to win her earliest subscribers. That was only a year after Even Stevens came to an end, long before Shia LaBeouf would make his series of bad decisions that would make his acting career a laughable failure, and much longer before any of his cringeworthy art projects that would lead him down the path of social justice-fueled self-destruction. A solid 9 years before Black Lives Matter was established, leading to the toxic anti-white bullshit we see today, and last but certainly not least, during a time when most of the millennials touting this shit were still in the single digits. I first observed this in Disney's animated series Kim Possible. After seeing multiple episodes of this show, it becomes painfully obvious that the producers aim to label all women as strategic scientific geniuses, super efficient agents, and, if nothing else, social butterflies without a single personality or physical flaw, unless to be made a spectacle of. Quite the contrary for men, however. Every male character in this show seems to be the very essence of the stereotypical man without a scrap of intelligence, unless it's vengefully accompanied by a sad, babbling, bumbling, buffoon-like comic relief personality. Needless to say, the same flaw is amplified for the common man or boy. To this day, the pattern has persisted. Can you honestly think of a single example of female empowerment in pop culture over the past decade and a half that has been done without having to make a point to dominate men or otherwise shit on the male gender in general? An example wherein the female protagonist is permitted to have a single character flaw without it being called the product of misogyny? Continuing on, in reference to Season 1, Episode 3, in this episode, Kim's best friend and partner in justice, Ron Stoppable, is forced by constant aggravation from Kim into getting a haircut. The style turns out to be something that Ron doesn't like and feels embarrassed about, but as it seems to gather attention from the popular crowd, he decides to change his personality in order to fit in with this new group of so-called friends. Of course, this change is in a manner much to the displeasure of Kim. According to the concept of political correctness, the right thing to do would have been to never try to change Ron in the first place, and even if he did willingly agree to the idea, the right thing to do would be to accept his new personality change and self-expression as respect for him as an individual, even if that did mean the end of a friendship. Instead, Kim decided to attack Ron about being out of control despite the fact that the change was her fault and her obligation to maturely accept the consequences. What does this tell our audience? That it is okay to change a friend and blame them of changing, so long as you are sure that you can change them back and make them feel like they were in fact partly to blame? Again, this pattern persists to this day. Can you think of a single sitcom over the past decade and a half wherein the husband is not a bumbling imbecile whose balls are kept securely in his wife's purse? A sitcom wherein the husband or central male protagonist is not constantly and exclusively chastised for his every flaw and permitted to change only at the direction and to the satisfaction of his wife? One of the biggest problems about excessive use of political correctness in the media is the setup of a fictional, chauvinistic pig simply for a scripted standing up for equal rights and a cheap girl power moment for the audience. Even though the main aim of it is to inspire women or any minority to stand up for equal rights, this kind of scenario and similar scenarios only result in false stereotypes on the side of the wrongdoer and fuel the hatred of those already fighting against each other. A baseball coach who accuses his players and other players of throwing like girls is a clear example of this, shown in the newest Disney Channel original movie, Eddie's $1 Million Cook-Off. And once again, this pattern persists. Time and again, we are force-fed reminders of how evil white people supposedly are, and how sexist men supposedly are. Sometimes in passing scenes sprinkled throughout shows and movies, sometimes with entire shows and movies based around the concept, and always with cartoonish parodies of past bigotry fabricated with the specific purpose of a marginalized person's contrived and shallow victory, from which the minorities and women of today can absorb the perpetuated delusion of persecution, and for which those same women and minorities can blame the straight white men of today as if they had anything to do with it, and as if we haven't progressed at all over the past few centuries. Despite the previous examples, this problem is not aimed solely at the feminist movement. The real problem is in all excessive political correctness. The setup of a fill-in-the-blank pride moment in the media requires that some fictional someone expressing extreme political incorrectness must also be set up. Even if the event is based on something that really happened, scenarios such as these in the media can only drag up the past and refuel anger and frustrations. This type of cheap, ill-gotten thrill is morally wrong. Political correctness has become a powerful and destructive weapon, and it must be used correctly if it is to be used at all. For good, not for further strike against each other. If we are to ever be treated as people despite our differences, then we must be treated as people, and that includes in the media. Man and woman, white and black, large and small, Christian and Buddhist alike, we must stop stereotyping in the media, as it is the most influential factor in our logic nowadays, especially to the young. If prejudice is ever to stop, then it has to stop with an uninfluenced generation, a new start, a group who can be taught the right way instead of the painfully wrong. And yet, despite my warning, all of these patterns have persisted and grown worse since I wrote this short piece, even as I pushed it to the back of my mind in favor of focusing on the career I wanted. When I wrote this, I was 18, and the youth I was talking about, the uninfluenced generation, they looked like this. And now, they look like this. And this. And this. I predicted what people spouting this hateful crap would make of this world, which is no amazing feat because these patterns existed long before I ever wrote this piece. Just a year prior, we saw Jennifer Garner pat all women on the back in Daredevil, wherein her response to a blind man daring to ask her name is to engage him in combat. In 1994, Season 5, Episode 6 of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air saw Will Smith happily sit back and accept the hateful scorn, shame, and humiliation from a feminist sorority simply at the implied reward of sex from one of its members. Cliff Huxtable was enduring Claire's incessant ball-busting on The Cosby Show when I was still an infant, and LeVar Burton was reminding us all of the white devil's evil in Roots since before I was born, which was just remade again last year. We should have all seen this coming. The only thing I didn't predict is how their brand of doublethink and double standards would allow them to effectively steer the conversation. It's only just recently that I'm starting to understand how, and I will use these comments on my video addressing Marvel's diversity bullshit as an example. Diversity is okay, social justice is the problem. Marvel has done diversity for decades. Diversity isn't the issue, it's Marvel's laziness. Diversity is not the problem with Marvel, it is the bad writing and lack of imagination of their books. If you think diversity is wrong, you're part of the problem. Poor writing is the problem. As you can see, this type of doublethink from the social justice movement not only allows them to redefine words, not only to say one thing and do something completely different, but it's also weaponized in such a way that fosters cognitive dissonance among the fence-sitters and the more moderate elements of our counter-movement. The very use of that word, diversity, ensures this, because that word does not mean to these social justice ideologues what it means to the rest of the world. And yet, despite me throwing air quotes around that word virtually every time I spoke it, the people who left these comments still entirely missed the point. Because the natural, easier response is to assume that to oppose the SJW brand of diversity is actually to oppose diversity in the true sense of the word. They are made to believe that it is to oppose the very presence of minorities and women and the idea of them taking up heroic roles at all. Anyone who has paid enough attention to this discussion understands that it is not minority and female characters we oppose, but the spiteful and divisive manner in which they are implemented in recent years. It is not actual diversity that we oppose, but the anti-white, anti-male sentiment that these SJW ass clowns believe must necessarily come with the empowerment of marginalized people. It is not the overcoming of racism and sexism to which we stand opposed, but the reinforcement of racism against whites and sexism against men. Just as I said in that video, the entire reason Marvel chooses to replace previously established white male characters with minorities and women rather than exerting the effort to create new, dynamic, and well-written minority and female characters has nothing to do with laziness. They choose that route because they know that making race and gender irrelevant to these characters' stories will be to take another step toward race and gender no longer being a popular concern. And that means we will have taken one step closer to finally eviscerating racism and sexism once and for all. One step closer to the day when we no longer talk about it. But that isn't what they want. I say again, they want race and gender talked about, and they want supposed social injustices to be blamed on straight white males. The only way to keep their narrative alive, and to keep the money fueling their propaganda machine pouring in, is to preserve the principles of racism and sexism on which it was founded. If they have no enemy to fight, they have no reason to exist, so they fabricate one to keep the fight going. As of a couple of years ago, I predicted that this pattern will eventually lead to a race war and a severely diminished state of gender relations that will rip this country apart at the seams. And ever since I made that prediction, the violence from Black Lives Matter and its supporters, the spreading popularity of both third-wave feminism and MGTOW, and the forced segregation of college safe spaces have only served to strengthen my certainty of that fate. This form of doublethink is how they steer the conversation, and I'm convinced that the only way we're going to escape the outcome I predict is if we stop letting them do so. Any person who isn't familiar with this debate is going to get the wrong idea when we stand opposed to feminism and diversity, based on the sane definition of those words, not how they are used in practice these days. It's time we stop using their terms and the words they have corrupted. And while I don't quite yet know how we're going to accomplish this, it's time we stop making it easy for them to rob us of support by taking care to avoid the trip line they've laid for us. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what you saw here, have a look at my other videos and leave me your thoughts in the comments. If you support my message, then please like, favorite, and subscribe. If you'd like to help this channel improve, you can reach out to me on Twitter or on Facebook with any suggestions. And if you'd like to support me more directly, please consider following me on Patreon. Links in the description. Thanks again, and I'll catch you all in my next video.